I wanted to know if you could kind of start off just talking about your background and your education.
Sure. So, sorry, I'm getting every phone call and imagine
Yeah.
take my
Yeah.
Apple Watch off.
Yeah.
Um,
And happy
so
birthday.
I appreciate that. I wish I was still in my 20s, but 33. And I think the current state of politics is just like internally, spiritually aged me further. But
Yeah.
yeah, so my background, I was born in Pennsylvania. I spent most of my life in rural Kentucky. So I went to public school in a small Kentucky town. So obviously, most of my friends and family growing up were pretty conservative, and even the ones who were still back in Pennsylvania. I know a lot of people who are not familiar with either of these states assume that because Pennsylvania is north of the Mason-Dixon line, oh, it must be like a progressive blue state. Well, no, you have pockets, but rural Pennsylvania is very much like rural Kentucky. So, most of my family and friends growing up, excuse me, were on the right. Um, but my dad, who was probably the foremost individual influence in my life, and my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, probably a close second. They were more liberal than most. I mean, my dad had voted for President Clinton twice, President Obama the first time, then voted for Mitt Romney in round two, voted for Trump both times, said after January 6th he would never vote for Trump again or Republicans if this is going to be the flagship, if he's going to be the flag holder of the party. So, to the extent that my family was political, it really wasn't overtly political. It was just kind of like, certain values you could tell were more liberal. Like I recall being in eighth grade for President Bush's reelection, and I just, from what little I knew, I just veered towards John Kerry more. I felt that he had more credibility from the patriotic angle anyway, as a veteran and Purple Heart recipient, and I just thought that he had a more reasonable, again, platform to the extent that I understood it, as a 14, 15 year old, or 13-year old, I guess it would have been because it was 2004. But yeah, that was my background. Then I went to high school in rural Kentucky. It was pretty popular, got along with people to the extent that we had any sort of diversity in rural Kentucky. I got along well with, the few gay people in school, the few black people in school. I had four sisters growing up, so I got along really well with the opposite sex. So I think all of these experiences lent themselves well to a degree of liberalization. Went to high school, or excuse me, college, um, at the nearest university, Western Kentucky University, and went and got a political science and sociology degree because at that point I'd really been interested in, like, I was a C-SPAN junkie. I loved political fiction and stuff like that. And my plan was to get a political science degree, go to law school, practice as an attorney for 10 years, and then transition into politics full time. But I didn't end up going to law school. So
So you might have partially answered this, but what made you so interested in politics? Because usually, I work at a high school and the kids are like, no, I hate politics. I hate politics. I'm never getting into it. I'm not going to be like my dad or my uncle, whatever. And then before you know it, everybody's political junkies, not necessarily with the background, but
yeah, it's kind of like when you're younger, you're never going to be interested in like Bed Bath and Beyond. And then you end up, I just went through that experience moving into this new apartment. I spent an inordinate amount of time in Bed Bath and Beyond and home furniture supplies and stuff. Like I think things just infiltrate along the way. And I understand when you're younger, professional politics and seeing people very dryly here in the United States. I mean, it's not like it's the United Kingdom where during prime minister questions and parliamentary debates, that the right honorable gentleman, but they're screaming at each other and it's very lively. You're out of order. It's very dry. It's Mitch McConnell, my fellow America. And so I get the lack of appeal. But on the substance, politics is, you easily make the argument, it's the most powerful and important force in the world, whether we like it or not, because even other things like healthcare, religion, national defense, everything. It affects everything. It affects sports, right? I mean, politics is that's the source of all power, material power. And so even it's kind of like, I'm not a tech guy, I'm not a computer guy, but it's like when you hit Control Alt Delete and you look at all the programs running on in the background that you don't notice, but if any of them go away, it radically alters how your computer functions. It's the same thing. And so I think as people get older, and then you have dominant personalities that kind of make politics more palatable to a mainstream. Donald Trump obviously did that remarkably well. I would argue for pure evil, but he did it nonetheless. You have AOC, who is a celebrity who is, I think, fighting for the right things. Bernie Sanders as well. So if it comes from the right person with the right degree of charisma and media savvy, then it gets really engaging. And so I think that that explains why people are interested at first and then become interested later on.
What was that aha moment for you, or were you always interested in politics?
It was a slow burn. So, like for me, okay, how old are you?
31.
I don't know if you're familiar with the show, and it was more of a legal drama than anything else, but there was a show on called Boston Legal in the early to mid 2000s, 2004, 2008. And it had James Spader, who was Ultron in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, had William Shatner, Captain Kirk, and it won a gazillion Emmys. And it was a legal dramedy, but it was very overtly political. It wasn't like Law and Order SVU, where it was just strict law. Like when the attorneys at the end of Boston Legal would give their closing arguments, it would be an overtly political message, and it was very liberal. And again, so even though I was like 10, 12, 13 years old, I was actually watching a bunch of like legal dramas and stuff that you wouldn't associate for somebody in my age range. So I would listen to, James Spader's character, Alan Shore, give a 4-minute epic closing speech, a monologue about the overreach of President Bush's administrations. And just like I don't want to say it indoctrinated me, but it delivered a very political message in a wildly entertaining way. And I was always interested, like I said, in discourse and debate and interactions and stuff like this. So kind of like those things ran parallel. And so there was no like aha moment. It was a thing that over time gradually and steadily increased until it was just a no brainer. When I went to college, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to study political science.
You also kind of answered this before, but what are like your inspirations or your influences? So you said your family members. You can speak more about that, or if there's other resources or other individuals.
Yeah. So as far as my family goes, like I said, my father is my foremost political, or he's my foremost just life influence, period. I would say that to the extent that he's influenced my politics, it's been purely from just like a values and temperament perspective. But other than that, I mean, we have major political, like I love the fact that he would just tell you he votes for the best candidate, of course, in his estimation, but he's so open-minded that he's voted for Democrats in the past, but then he could also vote for Donald Trump twice. Now he had a come to Jesus moment, right? Again, January 6th was the big single moment for him where he says he'll never vote for Trump again. But that doesn't really influence me. Like I view politics, whether we like it or not, as a team sport. I wish it wasn't the case. I wish we lived in the West Wing, right, where we could litigate our disagreements with one another and among one another, among our party in good faith, and not have to worry about losing elections or giving somebody a soundbite that can be weaponized. But at the end of the day, the Republicans have to be defeated. And I can defend that from a substantive angle, but like that's the heuristic under which I operate. So dad's not really an influence there. My grandmother, my late paternal grandmother, who recently passed away about a month ago, she was 87 years old. She was a huge influence on me when it came to, again, like values and the exploration of knowledge and being open-minded and kind to others. And so again, I think these things like kind of lent themselves inherently to liberal values. As far as just like strict politics, political commentators along the way really helped like shape certain things. So Mehdi Hassan is somebody that I admire quite a bit in the mainstream. Sam Cedar is another one that I didn't discover like alternate media until the pandemic. So I had a more normie. Jon Stewart, a huge one. Jon Stewart's a big one. And as a matter of fact, that's another one. Going back to one of your previous questions, I watched The Daily Show a lot and The Colbert Report. So that also had an influence on my political development. And yeah, and then when I discovered alternate media, again, I would say somebody like Sam Cedar would be a big one.
What exactly are your ideas about third party candidates? Because I think a lot of progressives are on that fence, right? Like, do we go for it, or do we kind of stay and play as a team, as you said? And if I understand you're saying I'm on the team now, but like, were you maybe a third party guy before that, or?
No, never. I mean, I love the idea. I mean, I wish we didn't live in a duopoly, right? But even like, even, you know, political systems that don't have a strict duopoly, like again, you look at the United Kingdom with the Westminster parliamentary process, they do effectively congeal into two primary camps. You have, you know, the Conservative Party, you know, and versus Labor, right? You have Tories and Labor and everything else. So it does seem to me that two becomes the ultimate reduction in a healthy political system. It'd be great if you had wild cards and stuff like that, where the coalitions, you know, if need be, would fracture more. But I think ultimately things end up looking very much like a duopoly, even if they're not as entrenched as ours is. So yeah, I love the idea. More options would ideally would always be better. As far as would I back a third party candidate now? Hell no. I mean, excuse me, to your high school students, absolutely not. Because I think the stakes are too high when one of the candidates, in my view, is a strident fascist and he's being aided and enabled by an authoritarian cult of personality with no limiting principle. I mean, when you hear Donald Trump and his attorneys argue in front of the United States Supreme Court that he should not be criminally liable if he shoots a political rival or if he attempts to stage a coup, and these are literal hypotheticals that Trump's attorney bit the proverbial bullet on. Yeah, I think those are official acts. There's no margin for error here. And so I certainly understand why a lot of progressives are demoralized, particularly with certain aspects of foreign policy, particularly what's going on in Gaza with President Biden and the Democrats. But and I could go into it more, but if I had to give like a 30-second thing, I would just say it's just simply the case that Joe Biden is objectively better than Donald Trump. And even on that particular issue, Gaza and Israel, Trump would be worse. RFK would be worse. Jill Stein might not be worse, but Jill Stein will never be president of the United States. On his very worst day in this election, and we're 6 months away from it, Joe Biden will stand a better chance. Joe Biden could just go dark for the next 6 months, like not say a word. We could never hear from the president of the United States, and he will still have a better shot than Jill Stein of winning the presidency. So my recommendation is, if you ever want to try to break the duopoly, now is not the time, especially when, if Donald Trump wins, he's already made it abundantly clear that a Trump 2.0 is going to be is excessively worse than Trump 1.0. So if you're ever going to take a risk, you have to go through real risk management. Is this worth the risk? And I would say no, because you're not going to win anyway. What you might do is put a fascist in power who will hurt you and your friends. Even if you think you've been hurt now, he's going to hurt you worse. So
The way you describe it is kind of how many others, even like someone like Noam Chomsky before, just saying like, these are the options, and if you don't do it, there might not be like another chance to even get that third party later or something along those lines. But
Chomsky had a great interview, and I think I know it was around 2020. It may have been even afterwards, with Brianna Joy Gray on the Bad Faith podcast, and he just made the unassailable argument. No matter how you slice it, even if you take a really strict assessment of, again, let's take Gaza out of the situation for just a second. I would argue President Biden's domestic record has not just been better than Trump's, it has been relative to other presidents, not just Trump, very good. Very good. Not since LBJ have we had a president with such a robust domestic platform and successes. To the extent that Bernie Sanders, and I don't think Bernie Sanders is a corporate Democrat, he's still an independent who caucuses with Democrats. He bucks the system time and time again. Even he's like, yeah, Biden's domestic agenda, pretty solid. But even if you grade him hyper harshly outside Gaza, and you say still not enough. To Chomsky's point, it is just, there's no way to, if you say you're on the left and you say there's no fundamental difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, in my opinion, you are a liar or an idiot, or perhaps both. There is no good faith argument to the contrary.
Two progressives, like Brianna Joy Gray, because she was kind of saying like, at what point is it enough? Like, I think she got into a fight with, I think it was Crystal Ball and Kyle Kalinske about this as well, and just saying, it's always the devil, the other guy. When do we not pick evil and pick the person that we should have? What would you tell other progressives?
So obviously, the conversation that argument, I would say, is still valid, but much less persuasive after October 7th. So that conversation with Kyle and Crystal was phenomenal. It's a phenomenal example because I thought it was so revealing about the nihilism in the I would say the privilege that just exuded from Brianna Joy Gray in that discussion. Because again, I'm thinking to myself, I had a conversation with two fellas who do a podcast called The Vanguard, and they're more left than I am. They're phenomenal. I'm a big fan of theirs, but we have sincere disagreements, particularly with respect to electoral politics. And to me, I told them, I said, okay, so I'm a relatively young, straight, white, heterosexual, male, cisgendered male, and I will probably, based on those merits, be among the last to be directly impacted by a fascist like Trump. Although I also publicly criticize him, so I might skip the line. I don't know. But to me, so I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, if we're just looking at pure self-interest, I don't really have a particularly compelling reason to vote or to do what I do. I just slide under the radar. But what about other people? What about my gay friends? What about my 4 sisters? What about my 9 nieces? What about my black friends? What about the other people who are not privileged? And to me, it's like I have a responsibility to pick the least harmful, viable option. There are people who are alive today because Donald Trump did not win a second term, be it through better COVID management from President Biden, be it through, a fight for women's rights and LGBTQ protections and things like. There are people who would be dead today if Donald Trump had gotten a second term. And they'll say, yeah, but there are people dead now because Joe Biden is funding Israel's war effort. And if you want to make that argument, it's perfectly fair. But Donald Trump has made it abundant. He even said today, he says it's a cancer and you got to go in and cut it out. So he would give Netanyahu the green light and might even hold his hand while doing it. Nuking Gaza. I mean, we don't know. He could drop a tactical nuke on Gaza. So what I would say is, even though I understand why the argument is less persuasive because of the visceral, emotional impact of everything that's happened after October 7th, the fundamental logic has not changed. If you care about other people and you're an eligible voter in the United States, I argue you have a moral obligation to do the least amount of harm or the greatest level of good. Voting for Jill Stein, I would argue, is not that, because she will never win. If she was as equally viable or comparably viable to Biden and Trump, like if it genuinely was a 3-way race and it was Dr. Cornel West versus Trump and Biden, then I would understand why progressives would throw their support and their votes behind Dr. West. It's a mathematical impossibility. So given 2 viable choices, I think you have a moral obligation to assign your votes to the least harmful candidate. And I think, objectively speaking, that's just Joe Biden. But I've also said this too, as a sidebar, that I support the uncommitted movement. I think it's perfectly fair for people, particularly in a primary, but even in the lead up to the general, to say, listen, Mr. President, if not for Gaza, you'd have my vote. Because of Gaza, I'm on the fence. You can still earn my vote. I am still willing to give you the vote, but I need concessions. I think that's perfectly fair. And I think the president, the Democratic Party, should be sweating at all times. I think they should be like, oh, we can't afford to completely disregard this particular block. So to me, it's got to be a good faith. Like, hey, I'm still willing to vote for you, but I demand a concession. That's fair. That's politics.
When you started pondering politics and kind of making different resources and educational videos, what was kind of like the goal? How did you get started with the channel?
I've always been an argumentative person, and I've always enjoyed debate and discussion. And so it was during the pandemic. Obviously, I was following politics very closely at the time because it was an election year. and I just gotten single. So I was single. I was trapped in my apartment and I was inundated in politics. So it was like any other, argumentative person in an election year when you've got nothing else to do. I was arguing with anybody I could confront. I didn't have Twitter at the time because I was very boomer in my social media. I was arguing a lot on Facebook, and I caused I contributed to many uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinners, shall we say. Um, and some acquaintances of mine introduced me to left alternate media. So I went through a stint actually, and this is another thing. This is part of the reason why there's a thesis I would argue to most of my videos. I unfortunately went through a phase in my life where I got sucked down the enlightened centrist route. So even though I despised Donald Trump, I voted for Secretary Clinton. And there was a no-brainer. There was no choice. The Democratic Party on their very worst day, I knew was better than Trump's Republicans. So I voted for Clinton. Don't regret it at all. And then, because of how YouTube algorithms work, I got sucked down this pipeline because somebody recommended, I think it was Ben Shapiro. And again, I'm an argumentative person. I love to debate people. And I was like, damn, okay, I wish we had a left Ben Shapiro, a liberal Ben Shapiro. And what I didn't know was on the other side of that algorithm, you had Kyle Kulinski, Sam Cedar, Destiny, David Pakman, Brian Todd. Like I didn't know because the algorithm funnels you. And so then it fed me Jordan Peterson, that Channel 4 interview. So you're saying, which by the way, that was when Jordan Peterson was much saner than what he is. And that interviewer was very bad faith. So I was very sympathetic. And just one thing led to another. But I had no idea that left version existed. So a friend finally was like, dude, have you ever checked out Secular Talk? Have you ever checked out Destiny? Have you ever checked out David Pakman, Sam Cedar Majority Report? And so then I started to listen to them during the pandemic. And then I had friends tell me, like, Jessiah, you've got some disposable income, you're single, you've got nothing else to do because you can't go anywhere. You should try getting into politics and political streaming and stuff like that. So I tried streaming and it was awful. I hated it because I'm actually not really that big of a video gamer. So I was like, what the hell am I going to do for 4 or 5, 6 hours? I tried it and it was awful. And so then I started to consume more content. And then a guy named Luke Beasley reached out to me. And Luke Beasley is a young content creator. He's bigger than I am. He also recently experienced another growth. And even though there's a colossal age discrepancy between us, he kind of became my content creation mentor. And then Destiny was an influence to a secondary extent as well. He also gave me a platform by being so, open to small content creators. And so between the two of them, I started to sharpen my arguments, sharpen my positions, and especially from Luke, craft a process by which to really blow the channel up. And my goal is, for personal goals, I wanted to both have the experience and also get to a point where I could do it full time. And I finally got a chance to do that in February. I quit my job and now I do this full time. In terms of my aspirational goals, I really wanted to help beef up, to the extent that I could at all, left or liberal leaning political commentary. I feel very strongly that there has to be a heavy and powerful counterweight to the Daily Wire, to Steven Crowder, to Tim Pool, to all these people. And I am also a big believer that there is a market for a harder, more ruthless side of the left and side of the Democratic Party, because we're too often seen as these feckless, doormats, right? That we just let people run roughshod over us. And I look at all these wildly successful people on the right who also, even though their policies I was appalled by, the attitude I really liked. I liked that Ben Shapiro would be confrontational. Obviously, tens of millions of people love that about Trump. And so I'm thinking, what if we can actually take that? What if we bully the bullies? And what if we make it clear that false equivalence is stupid and make fun of it and condemn it and train people to not just default to, well, both sides are the problem. Maybe there is something that could be successful. Maybe that could hype people up. It hyped me up. And maybe there's a market for that, an appetite for that. Who are like, yeah, I don't want to be embarrassed about being a liberal or a progressive. I don't want to have to apologize for voting Democrat. I really want to stick it to Republicans who are ruining this country. The Republican Party, in terms of its elected officials, are destroying this country. They hate this country in a lot of respect, and they're also victimizing their own base. Again, most of my family members and friends are conservative. I think they are also victims of people like Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, and people who do not better. Rural Kentucky. Kentucky is still one of the most impoverished states in this country. Mississippi, Alabama. It's like, what have Republican leadership ever gotten you? And so it's like, okay, maybe if we lean into some of that attitude and we're not just like, oh, golly gee, sorry, I hope I didn't offend you. Like we're like, no, damn it, these are our values, these are our convictions. And if you're a bully, if you're going to bully minorities and women and trans people, we'll bully you, and we're better bullies than you. And we'll beat you in the argument, we'll dunk on you, we'll make you cry until you concede and join the rest of civilized society. That's my goal. So that's why again, that's a huge thesis of my content, that I think it's so important for Democrats to have a bit of a sharper edge. Yes, allow a road to redemption for people who change their minds. We can't be complete. We believe in rehabilitative justice on the left. That also has to extend to lifelong conservatives. But we have to make it clear things have to change, and we're not going to be meek and timid and feckless.
The way you describe it makes me think of the Fox 5, the Jessica Tarlov.
Yeah, I love her. My hero. I do. And here's the thing, like Tarlov, to me, I've said it before, she has the toughest job in media, because she's not like metaphorically ripping spines out of chests. I mean, she has a hard edge to her, but to me, what she does is even more impressive, because I know myself, I consider myself a nice guy, but I have to imagine if I was being heckled by the peanut gallery like that, I'd finally snap too. And I'm like, you know what? I don't even care about making the point. My goal is to get you to leave this chair in tears. I want you to cry on camera like a loser in front of your audience. Instead, what she does is sometimes she gives it back, but she's just like, man, she's like Neo in the Matrix. She just dodges these bullets and she throws a fact back. I think she has the hardest job in media. And you can tell, because now that she's on maternity leave, everybody that they have put in that chair has failed in comparison. Many of them are just like their own closet conservatives, like Pierce Morgan. And they had Jonathan Turley, this constitutional law professor from GW, who would just back any right-wing insane notion from the law. He's always the Republicans' go-to constitutional scholar. He was the token liberal on the 5. And I'm like, if he's the token liberal, where are we? So
how does like the research process work for you? Like, you don't have to go into great detail, but like how do you select stories and how do you do your background work? What sources do you use?
So Twitter has been, even under Elon Musk, I mean, obviously it's a cesspool compared to what it used to be, but it's a good process by which you curate news. So I'm a one-man show, for better or worse, and probably for worse. Like I probably stand to be a lot better, but like I do my own research. I don't write scripts. So everything you see is in one take. And so it may be in literally one take, or I have 10 false starts and it drags out. So sometimes my work day is super short. Sometimes it's like 12 hours, depending on how with it I am. So I have to be as efficient with my time as possible with respect to research. Now, because of my political science degree and the fact that I'm relatively well read, especially on things like theory, so like on separation of powers, checks and balances, and all these things. So it's really about collecting a relevant news story by which to frame the broader argument. So I follow certain accounts: Aaron Rupar, ACYN, Midas Touch, Ron Filipowski. I follow Mediaite is a good one too, because I'm not a journalist. That's the other thing. Journalists, I think, in many ways have a much harder job because they're actually creating the news. I just offer analysis and political commentary from a political perspective. So it's about finding these news stories to frame the actual message. And that's why usually, like, it's not about one story. There's like a lead in, a hook, because you got to get people's attention. And then I try to beef it up with other relevant stories and other like this poll and that and whatever, and try to make it as robust as possible. And then I keep it all. I favorite it. I use bookmarks and Twitter. So that way, if I'm like, man, what was that one clip? When I hear Donald Trump talk about how presidents should be entitled to absolute immunity, wasn't there a clip of Donald Trump as the sitting president saying that he wants to prosecute Barack Obama, an ex-president, thus revealing that he's an unprincipled, hypocritical loser? And isn't that my trump card? So then I go back into my bookmarks, I find it, and I make sure I plug it in. So yeah,
Yeah.
and also I read a lot of books. So Rachel Bidicoffer put out a book recently called Hit 'Em Where It Hurts. Ari Berman just put out a book called Minority Rule. I've been reading that about how our institutions are very anti-majoritarian here in the United States. And so again, I try to beef it up, and not I try to be more C-SPAN than TMZ, but I do try to add some TMZ flavor just to get people in.
Yeah. And I like when you team up with Luke Beasley because it's like good cop, bad cop.
It
Because
is, yeah. He's
like the
so
most
gentle.
kind. Yeah. Very, very, very kind.
He is. He's very, yeah, it is. And so it's a good dynamic too, because he also helps. He's like sentient blood pressure medicine for me. So like he can just like Jessiah, just he exudes it from his pores. I'm like, you're right.
A couple more questions. I got like 5.5 minutes and it's just going to cut out abruptly, which is fine. But again, I appreciate your time. How do you think government and politics should be taught in high school?
Rigorously and frequently. I think that again, obviously, pedagogy, that's its own thing, and you got to teach math and science and everything else. I would say understanding intimately how your government functions is infinitely more important than the quadratic formula. I'm sorry, like with all respect to math teachers out there, unless you're going to be majoring in math, like that's important. But I think civics and politics need to be taught year, every year. And obviously, you got to make it as appetizing as possible. But it's sad when you hear poll after poll after poll that outside the president, people can't name the three branches of government, or people don't understand what judicial review is, or how the Senate is elected compared to the president, and that the Supreme Court justices serve for life, and all these things. It's obviously not all you teach, but it is the most important thing you can teach to somebody you're trying to create as a citizen. You're trying to shape people to be citizens and functioning adults. That's infinitely more important than abstract and obscure mathematical formulas.
Why would you say history is important?
History, there's this quote that if those who don't understand history are doomed to repeat it. And we see that. We see like cyclical confrontations with fascism, right? People who say, I can imagine people going through, 1930s Germany were thinking, oh, this could have never happened. And here we are doing the same thing because we just assume that America is immune to fascism. So, number one, it's interesting. Number two, it helps inform the future. It is a necessary building block. And even if you don't think, when I studied in high school and middle school civics about President Washington and the peaceful transfer of power, who cares? That was in the past. And then we get to 2020. It's like, oh, the peaceful transfer of power is the individually most important civic tradition we have in our society. It's not the only thing, but if there was one thing that distinguished us at the founding from every other place on earth, it was the fact that President Washington yielded power, and then President Adams did to President Washington, to President Jefferson, from one party to the next. So you don't think about these things, but it's good to have in your back pocket because it helps inform you for the future.
Do you have any advice for young social studies students?
Yeah, 100%. Read. Don't take any of it for granted. Also understand that when you are being taught social studies, students, you are being taught a very abridged, I don't want to say reductive, but by definition, it's a very abridged iteration. And the details are so much more interesting than you think. We as a nation, the United States of America, have a fascinating and very often morally ambiguous and terrifying history, but it is fascinating. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to make you a ton of money, right? I'm not saying that you maybe want to pair it with something for a future career, but even as just a hobby and as a crucial building block for your future, it's necessary because you will never escape politics. Even if you think, I don't think about politics, politics doesn't affect me every day. We could go through 10,000 examples. When you hit a red light and you have to stop at a red light, that's because a law compels you to do so. Your life is touched by politics at the local, state, and federal level, the international level, every damn day. You probably don't even realize it.
What resources or channels or podcasts would you recommend to just anyone interested in politics?
So there's a really handsome guy named Jessiah who runs a channel called Pondering Politics. You check him out,
Good one.
youtube.com/at Pondering Politics. But Sam Cedar, Majority Report with Sam Cedar, he's my favorite alternate because he's more online, progressive commentator. He gets in really into the wonky weeds. He's a phenomenal debater. Zateo is a new project that was started by Mehdi Hassan, who was my favorite mainstream progressive commentator. You should check him out. I think Vosh, or not Vosh, Destiny is a big one too, especially from the debate perspective. C-SPAN's huge, right? Because again, you're talking about Tom Hartman. It's spelled THOMHARTMAA or MANN. Tom Hartman's a really good one too because he gets into the wonky weeds. But you have to find that combination of entertainment plus substance. And some of these people are more on substance, some of them more on entertainment, but it's a good pipeline to get you into more left/liberal leaning politics. But I definitely check that out.
Thank you. And thanks for talking today. I appreciate it. Have a good birthday.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. You have a great day.
You too. See ya.